of H.R. 2551. The chair appoints the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Woodall, to preside over the Committee of the Whole.
Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union for consideration of H.R. 2551, which the clerk will report by title.
A bill making appropriations for the legislative branch for the fiscal year ending September 30th, 2012, and for other purposes.
Pursuant to the rule, the bill is considered read the first time. The gentleman from Florida, Mr. Crenshaw, and the gentleman from California, Mr. Honda, each will control 30 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Florida.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself such time as I might consume.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen of the House, this is the funding bill for the Subcommittee on Legislative Branch of the Appropriations Committee for 2012. Everybody knows that we are in the midst of some very difficult economic times. I don't need to tell the members that we've had deficits of over $1 trillion for the last couple of years. Don't need to tell people that we've got about $4 trillion added to our national debt in the last 2.5 years. We all know that we have $14 trillion of national debt, and that equals our entire economy. And the one thing that everyone would agree on is that we just can't keep spending like that. That's just not sustainable. Everyone says that. And so we bring this bill in the midst of that kind of discussion, and we want to try to do our part in getting a handle on the way we spend money around this place. We want to try to stop this culture of spending and turn it into a culture of savings. And so when we bring this bill, this legislative branch appropriations bill, it will spend 6.4% less than last year. That's $227 million. It will spend 14.2% less than was requested. That's $474 million. Now, it's our best effort to keep the commitment that we're going to try to do things more efficiently and more effectively than we have before. Now, how did we do that? Well, we listened to the facts. We had 8 formal hearings. We had numerous informal hearings. We listened. We set priorities. We made some tough choices, and we have the bill before us. And I certainly want to thank the members of the subcommittee for their involvement, for their participation, for their hard work, for their input, and a special word of thanks to Mike Honda from California, the ranking member who was involved in the process all along the way and knows the difficult choices that we had to make. I certainly want to thank our staff, both the minority and the majority staff. A lot of times we go home at night and they stay and keep on working, and they helped us get to where we are today to have this final product. Now, let me just give you some of the highlights of this bill. If you look at the legislative branch, about 36% of the spending goes to the House of Representatives. That's where we are tonight. And half of the money that goes to the House goes to what we call members' representational accounts, the so-called MRAs. And so we thought that since we've asked every agency in federal government to rein in spending, we've asked them all to tighten their belt, to do more with less, to be more efficient than they ever have been before. We've subjected them to this kind of scrutiny, and we thought it would only be fair to apply that same process to us. And that's why the MRAs in this House are reduced by 6.4%. All the committee staff budgets, they're reduced by 6.4%. The leadership budgets are reduced by 6.4%. Now, those MRAs, that's money that's taxpayers' money. We have it available to us to run our offices. We can hire staff, we can lease space, we can buy equipment, we can do a lot of things. We have a lot of discretion. Now, some people will say we shouldn't cut the MRAs. Some people will say we've cut them too much, that we can't continue to do our job. Well, it seems to me that if we're going to ask every other agency of the federal government to do more with less, then we've got to look at our own selves, and that's what we've done here. We've said that we want to lead by example. We want to share in the sacrifice that everyone is sharing throughout the federal government, and that's why we did what we did. Some people will say that Well, we may have to fire somebody. Again, members have the money available to them. They can decide how they want to spend it. They want to have lots of staff, they can have lots of staff. If they want to send lots of mail out, they can send lots of mail out. The MRAs even allow members to lease a car. There'll be an amendment later on to say you can't lease a car if it costs more than $1,000 a month. So when you hear people say this is going to make it very difficult for us to do our job, I think what it's going to do is make us as members be more responsible, be more efficient, set the right priorities, and continue to do our job. Because some people say we ought to cut even more. But I would say that if you look at the facts, we've cut this legislative branch funding by 9% over the last 2 years. We've cut the MRAs again. Last year we cut them 5%. The Appropriations Committee was cut by 9% last year. And so I think we've struck a balance between doing more with less, being more efficient, and yet being able to do the things that we need to do in a very efficient and a very safe manner. Now, there are other agencies that we oversee, and some are extensions of the House, so to speak. The Congressional Budget Office, the Government Accountability Office. These are agencies that provide service to the members of this body. And as extensions of the House, we felt like they should be subject to the same scrutiny that we were. Their budgets are going to be reduced by 6.4% as well. That means they're going to have to be a little smarter, set priorities, work more efficiently. And actually, as members, Mr. Speaker, we're going to have to be more judicious in the things that we ask for these agencies. Sometimes we just willy-nilly say, I want to report here, I want to report there. We need to decide what we really need and what we don't necessarily need. And I think they'll be able to continue to do the job that they've been doing all along, to supply us with the information we need to be effective members of this body. We also oversee the Library of Congress, a wonderful historic building that you can see from this House of Representatives. Very important to us. Their budget has been reduced. They're working with us to make sure that they can continue to provide the services that we need. We oversee the architect of the Capitol. He's charged with overseeing over 1 million square feet of offices all across this Capitol Hill. His budget is being cut. And he's got a list of the projects he needs to do. He's set a priority there, and he will do what needs to be done, but he'll make sure that he doesn't impair the health or the safety of any members of this House, any staff, or the people that work on the Hill. We reduced the budget of the Government Printing Office. And finally, we oversee the Capitol Police. And a lot has been said about our ability to make sure that we're safe in this area. We didn't reduce the spending for the Capitol Police. We recognize that security is not a luxury. It's something that we need. But we also realize that members can be more diligent. We can be more aware. What we learned from this situation in Arizona with our fellow Congresswoman is that our service is not without risk. But many of the things that we need to do from a security standpoint have to do with our own common sense, our own awareness, our own diligence. So we provide the Capitol Police with the money that they need to not only make sure that we are safe in this House, our staff and those that work in the Capitol complex are safe, but also the millions of Americans that come here to make sure they're safe as well. And so I think, Mr. Speaker, we have a bill that strikes the right balance. We recognize the difficult times that we're in. We've taken the money we have available. We've set priorities, and we've made some tough choices. And I think this bill represents some responsible, fiscally responsible savings that will allow us to continue to do our job, to do it in a safe and efficient manner. And as we have put all these agencies around the federal government under this scrutiny to see if they can do things more efficiently, we have not exempted ourselves. And so with that, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield myself 6 times that I may consume.
Gentleman is recognized.
I would like to begin by thanking Chairman Crenshaw, the Appropriations Majority staff, and his personal staff for the professionalism shown during this process. While it is not the bill I would have written, it is a process that I would have followed. As for the bill, the legislative branch minus the Senate is being cut by 6.4% from FY 2011 and 9% from FY 2010. These cuts are being done while we had to fix a $13 million hole for the Capitol Police because of their accounting mistake in fiscal year 2010. I believe these cuts are harmful to our members' ability to serve their constituents and to the House's responsibility to provide effective oversight. The budget allocation is what one could expect given the majority is also cutting women and children's nutrition programs, consumer protection, and other important programs in other bills. The only thing this bill has succeeded in doing, however, is joining the other flawed bills by cutting at the expense of jobs, strong oversight, and common sense efficiencies. Maybe with this bill, the smallest of all 12, and the one that funds our members' own operations, the majority will see the real-life impacts of these cuts, one of which is not real deficit reduction. This bill will cut the Library of Congress by 8.5%, including a reduction of over 300 employees, 50 of whom will be cut from our much relied upon Congressional Research Service. Members should ask their staff how often they use CRS staff for research, particularly in responding to questions and concerns from their constituents. This bill would cut the government printing office by 16%, an agency already planning to let go of 330 employees. There is language encouraging the privatization of GPO's activities, which could make it more expensive for Congress to operate. The Government Accountability Office, or GAO, is cut by 6.4%. Every dollar spent at GAO results in $4 in taxpayer savings. This begs the question, is it the majority's priority to not save taxpayers' money? Those who claim to want increased oversight of government programs should reject cuts to GAO. They are known as Congress's watchdog, and that watchdog should have teeth. We have heard that some members' offices are furloughing staff to meet the 5% cut to the members' representational allowance, or MRA, in 2011. Now, this bill will further cut MRAs by 6.4%. Cuts to the MRA means cuts to members' day-to-day abilities to effectively represent our and their constituents. From the staff assistant answering calls from our constituents to the caseworker helping grandma recover her lost Social Security check. All of these services are funded through MRA. Each office would lose, on the average, of $88,000, which would mean 2 to 3 staffers per office. In what world does laying people off recover economy? The cut and grow mantra does not work in the economy as a whole. It certainly will not work in the corridors of Congress. I hope that members of this body understand that agencies we rely on will have to deny or severely limit services provided to members' office because there are fewer people to handle requests. I would say to my colleagues, remember these cuts the next time you have requests of GAO, the Architect of Capitol, Congressional Research Service, and the Congressional Budget Office. Beyond that, after the tragic shooting of our friend and colleague Gabby Giffords in Tucson, we were told to increase security in our district offices. But how are we supposed to pay for all of it? Certainly not out of our office budgets that are being whacked, not from the Capitol Police who are flat funded, and not from the Sergeant-at-Arms whose budget is cut 10%. I have a great deal of respect for my chairman, Crenshaw. There are not many things that he could have done differently with the allocation he had to work with. I hope we rethink trying to balance the budget by cutting services to the people who sent us here, our constituents, and we can and must do better, Mr. Chairman. And I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Florida is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I yield such time as he may consume to the chairman of the full Appropriations Committee, Mr. Rogers.
The gentleman from Kentucky is recognized.
Thank the chairman for yielding the time. Mr. Chairman, I rise today to commend the H.R. 2551, the fiscal year 2012 Appropriations Act for the legislative branch. Mr. Chairman, this is the 6th appropriations bill that we will have passed through the House out of 12 bills that will be considered. 3 more of the 12 bills are waiting, queued up to come before the House. But this is the 6th. This will make us halfway through the appropriations bills for 2012. I want to commend Chairman Crenshaw and Mr. Honda for hard work, blood-curdling decisions they've had to make, because this bill deals with our colleagues and us and the operation of this body that we all love. This bill will help stop government overspending, starting in our own backyard. If we're trying to get back on a more sustainable course, we've got to cut spending wherever we can. And we've got to make do with less. Our constituents ask us to get our own fiscal house in order. And we're leading by example with this legislation. This legislation prioritizes the safety of the thousands of people who work in and visit the Capitol complex every day, providing essential funding for the Capitol Police, services for our visitors, and necessary maintenance. But we're keeping to our commitment to reduce spending, and so we've cut back in other areas. We've trimmed the House leadership and the member and committee budgets by over 6%. This legislation provides smaller budgets for our own offices and continues our goal of reducing spending across the entire federal government. To demonstrate my commitment to savings and to prove the feasibility of reduced budgets, earlier this year, we directed that my own committee, the Appropriations Committee, cut its budget not by the 5% that all other committees cut. We said, we'll see you 5 and ask for 4 more, and we cut our budget by 9%. And this bill continues that reduction, trimming another 6.4%. So since January of this year, the Appropriations Committee, when this bill is finished, will have cut its own budget by some 15.4%. Just as American families are forced to live within their means, their representatives in Washington should do the same. I understand that many of my colleagues are concerned about what these cuts might mean for their own offices. I know making these hard decisions will not be easy for them, just as they were not easy for us to make in the first place. But these cuts are necessary. We can't ask everyone else to make cuts to their budgets and not do the same to ourselves. We all have to share in the sacrifice during this financial crisis, and I'm proud that we're doing our part to help our nation dig itself out of dangerous, job-killing debt so that we can get our economy back on track. Again, I want to commend Chairman Crenshaw and Ranking Member Honda and their staffs on a strong bill that makes these responsible reductions. And I urge our colleagues to support the legislation. And I yield back. Thank you.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from California is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from the beautiful state of Washington, the ranking member of the Appropriations Committee, Mr. Dix.
Gentleman from Washington is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you. I thank the ranking member, Mr. Honda, for yielding to me, and I'd like to thank Chairman Crenshaw, Chairman Rogers, and the staff on both sides for what they have been able to do to accommodate some of the priorities of Democratic members as they have assembled the bill. This bill would fund the legislative branch, minus the Senate, at $3.3 billion. This represents a 6.4% reduction from fiscal year 2011 and a 9% reduction from fiscal year 2010. I appreciate the overview that Congressman Honda has provided, and at this point I would simply like to join him in expressing serious concern on behalf of our colleagues regarding security for our district offices and for official events involving members as well as the general public. After the tragic shooting in Tucson, the Congress was left to reevaluate security in members' district. While it is one of the utmost importance to ensure that citizens continue to have access to their representatives in Congress, the Tucson event is a reminder that we must be vigilant in providing security to members, to our staffs, and to our constituents who attend our events. The effort by the House to improve district security after the shooting put much of the burden on the members' offices, including the payment for that security. As members' office budgets are being cut for the second time in a year, there has to be reconsideration of that policy, perhaps with an eye towards a more centralized approach to security. While we have not seen specific estimates of the cost involved here, it would clearly represent a substantial expense, especially if the budget of the Secret Service is used as a guide. The Capitol Police appropriations recommended in this bill is $340 million, equal to the fiscal year 2011 level. The Capitol Police protect the entire Capitol complex with primary security responsibilities for 541 members of Congress, resident commissioners, and delegates. By comparison, the House-passed Secret Service appropriation bill included over $1 billion for the protection of 50 to 70 individuals, including the President. If the Capitol Police are going to be required to assess more threats against members and take a more active role in district security, the Capitol Police budget should reflect these increased demands. Conversely, if members' individual office budgets are going to continue to assume these additional security costs, their budget should somehow reflect this responsibility. Again, I thank the ranking member for his work on the bill and the chairman and Mr. Rogers and our staff. We have a great staff and they do great work for this institution. And I yield back the remainder of my time.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Florida is recognized.
I reserve.
Gentleman reserves. The gentleman from California is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from North Carolina, the ranking member of the Homeland Security Appropriations Subcommittee, Mr. Price.
Gentleman from North Carolina is recognized for 3 minutes.
I thank the gentleman for yielding, and I commend both the chairman and the ranking member for their hard work on this bill. Although with an inadequate allocation, there are decisions that have been made that I believe will adversely affect our work and that I hope can be revisited down the line. That's not what I want to talk about at this moment, though. I want to talk about an unusual feature of the legislative branch bill that I hope also can be revisited down the line. I want to call attention of my colleagues to the elimination of a program that has served this body and our nation's interests well, the Open World Leadership Center, a unique enterprise sponsored by the legislative branch of our government, something that I think should make us very proud of this institution and its international outreach. The bill before us today provides only shutdown expenses for this program. Now, Mr. Chairman, I'm not going to offer an amendment to restore the program's funding because of the extremely low subcommittee allocation and the absence of acceptable offsets. There simply isn't money lying around to apply to this purpose. But I cannot let this body's commitment to the Open World program end without voicing my disappointment and my hope that this matter will be reconsidered and can be reconsidered in the context of the Senate bill. The Open World Leadership Program is a unique program administered by the Library of Congress that over the years has earned bipartisan and bicameral support. Since 1999, the program has brought emerging leaders from former Soviet states to all 50 states of our country, providing them a first-hand look at the U.S. democratic process, enabling them to exchange ideas with their American counterparts, and encouraging them to relate what they learn to their home environments. The participants in Open World are not the people that typically participate in international exchange programs. They're not just the political or business leaders in the capital who venture to other nations frequently. No, they're teachers, they're judges, they're health workers, they're young activists. They're all sorts of people who live often in rural areas and smaller cities. The program penetrates deeply, in my experience, uniquely so. It penetrates quite deeply, rather than just being another run-of-the-mill exchange program. I know about this, and many other members in this body do as well. I've participated personally with these leaders as they've come to my district. This is a well-designed program. It's a program that has made and can make a difference. It doesn't just merely scratch the surface. It involves Russia, Ukraine, Moldova, Georgia, Azerbaijan, Armenia, Turkmenistan, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, and Serbia. These countries remain strategically linked to U.S. interests because of their history and also because of their location in Eastern Europe and Central Asia. The Open World program is an effective diplomatic tool. May I have 2 additional minutes?
Another minute. 2 minutes?
2 minutes, yes.
I'll yield him 2 more minutes.
The gentleman from North Carolina is recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank the gentleman. The Open World program is an effective diplomatic tool and one of the legislative branch's few direct democracy promotion programs. My colleagues, Open World is not about us. It's not about us. It's not about our institution. It's an instrument of outreach, a unique one. We should be proud of this. A unique instrument of outreach to a critical part of the world, and its loss would be deeply felt. Now, in previous Congresses, there has been some question of whether the Open World program should be placed where it is administratively or in the legislative branch appropriations bill. I've looked at this. I've concluded that the program's very placement in the legislative branch is in fact an asset. Making clear the program is not tied to a specific administration with its foreign policy goals and priorities and politics. This, in fact, we're told, has sometimes reduced obstacles to participation and has made the program more accessible. Mr. Chairman, Congress's sponsorship of the Open World has made me proud of this institution. We've assumed responsibility very directly for projecting our democratic principles and values to countries with histories of oppressive rule. We need to reflect further. We need to think long and hard on what it would mean to drop this program. What does that say about us? And what kind of opportunities would we forego? If we do think long and hard, I have some confidence that we would reconsider what the subcommittee has recommended. And I very much hope we will have that opportunity. And I thank you and yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Florida is recognized.
Continue to reserve.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from California is recognized.
I yield back the remainder of my time.
The gentleman yields back.
Yield back, balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. All time for general debate has expired. Pursuant to the rule, the bill is considered read for amendment under the 5-minute rule. No amendment to the bill shall be in order except those printed in House Report 112-173. Each such amendment may be offered only in the order printed in the report, except pursuant to the order of the House of today, Amendment number 9 and Amendment number 12 may be offered out of the specified order. Each such amendment may be offered only by a member designated in the report, shall be considered read, debatable for the time specified in the report, equally divided and controlled by the proponent and an opponent, shall not be subject to amendment, and shall not be subject to a demand for division of the question. It is now in order to consider Amendment number 1, printed in House Report 112-173. For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I rise as a designee of the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Bishop, and offer the amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 1, printed in House Report number 112-173, offered by Mr. Honda of California.
Pursuant to House Resolution 359, the gentleman from California, Mr. Honda, and a member opposed will each control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Honda.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The amendment I am introducing on behalf of my colleague, Sanford Bishop, would increase the Capitol Police by a modest $1 million for the district office security for members. After the shootings of our colleague, Ms. Giffords, The Sergeant-at-Arms and the Capitol Police provided members with access to security reviews. These reviews and guidelines by the Sergeant-at-Arms provided members with a litany of equipment and capital improvements that are needed to improve district office security. Even though the recommendations came from our security agencies, members were left to fund these upgrades through their office budget. When members' offices are being cut by more than 10% in a year, I'm afraid the strain to continue constituent services will impede any member's ability to pay for these upgrades. I'm hoping this amendment will be a small step in providing a centralized pot of funds so these upgrades do not go ignored. The offset is from a lower priority House account that funds transition costs since 2012. It is not a transition year.
Is the gentleman reserved?
Yes, I reserve.
Gentleman,
Mr. Chairman,
for what purpose does the gentleman from Florida rise?
I just want to say to the gentleman that we're all concerned about security upgrades, and we accept the
Does the
amendment.
gentleman claim time in opposition to the amendment?
No, I accept the amendment.
Without
That means
objection,
I'm
the
in
gentleman is
favor of it.
recognized.
So I just accepted the amendment.
The amendment is accepted. Does the gentleman from California yield back?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Crenshaw, and I yield back.
The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from California. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is adopted. It's now in order to consider Amendment Number 2, printed in House Report 112-173. For what purpose does the gentleman from North Carolina seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk that's been made in order under the rule.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 2, printed in House Report number 112-173, offered by Mr. Watt of North Carolina.
Pursuant to House Resolution 359, the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Watt, and a member opposed will each control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from North Carolina.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield myself 2 minutes.
The gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, my amendment to the legislative branch bill would decrease funding for the Office of Congressional Ethics, the OCE, by $619,200 and transfer these funds to the spending reduction account. I've offered this amendment because I believe there is a substantial bipartisan consensus, one, that the responsibilities of the OCE are redundant and duplicative of the House Ethics Committee. 2, that the OCE's operations are substantially staff-driven, and the staff has taken the OCE's mission well beyond what was intended in the statute that created the entity. 3, that the procedures of the OCE are unfair and sometimes abusive of the rights of members of the House. 4, that a substantial part of the funds we spend on the OCE waste taxpayers' money. And 5, that using those funds to reduce our debt and deficit would be a far better use. In these difficult budget times, I believe we have an obligation to judge the OCE on the same criteria on which we measure other agencies of the federal government. Using those criteria, my amendment proposes to eliminate duplication, demand accountability and adherence to the purposes for which the agency was created, demand fair due process treatment for members of Congress as we would for other employees in both the private and public sectors, and force us to make a choice about how best to use our over $600,000 of taxpayer funds. I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. Who seeks time?
Speaker, I'd like to claim time in opposition.
Is the gentleman opposed?
Yes, I am.
The gentleman from Massachusetts, recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this amendment, as far as I'm concerned, is merely a punishment because some members haven't liked some of the things the OCE has done. I will tell you that having drafted the legislation or the rule, I don't like everything they've done either. But the appropriate way to deal with that is to amend the rules of the House. or to amend, to try to talk to them to amend their own rules. There are ways to do the things that others have been concerned about, some of which I share. Some of which I have shared. I've expressed my concern on certain issues to members of the OCE in the past. It's not to just pick a number and slash that number of 40%. That is merely, as far as I'm concerned, draconian punishment to say, we're the boss, you're not. It's not going to change one thing that the OCE does. It will simply make it a little bit more difficult for this House to maintain the integrity level that we have struggled so desperately to gain back over the years. We've had our troubles. We will have problems in the future. One of our colleagues will do something that none of us will like. The question is not that. The question is, how does the public see us? I have a letter that I'd like to submit to the record that I think everybody got at their office today from the Campaign Legal Center, the Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington, Common Cause, Democracy 21, the League of Women Voters, Public Citizen, and U.S. PIRG. I don't agree with everything that each one of these organizations stands for either. However, they all agree that this agency, even with its flaws, has improved the reputation of this House when it comes to policing our own members. Again, I want to be clear. I do not think that they have done a perfect job. My guess is I don't think most members think that the Ethics Committee has done a perfect job over the years. That's not the measure. If that's the measure, none of us would be in Congress. We couldn't get anything done because there is no such thing as perfection. The measure is simply what has been done to improve the image of this House. And I think everyone in Washington who follows these things agrees that the creation of this group and the actions it has taken overall have improved the image of this House, and I would say that a cut to this level is simply a draconian measure to punish them for what they have done, as opposed to try to improve what they do in the future. With that, I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves.
Yes, I do.
The gentleman from North Carolina is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I yield 1 minute to Mr. King.
The gentleman from Iowa is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank the gentleman from North Carolina for yielding, and I rise in support of the gentleman's amendment. And the reason for it is this. As I watch the structure of the OCE be set up, and I'd say to the gentleman, we've had this for over 200 years. We have the Ethics Committee to take care of this business. If we want to amend the rules of the House, let's go back to what the rules of the House are. But the OCE has crossed a line over and over again. And I'd make this point that they've gone on witch hunts. They've taken pieces of information that came from political opposition on either side and embellished that into things, and they have violated Roman law, English common law, and the decency of the House by this. Classified confidential information used against members of Congress who don't have an opportunity to face their accuser, whose reputations have been damaged by sometimes, I'll just say certainly, leaks to the press, sometimes I suspect willful leaks to the press. We need to go back to the Ethics Committee dealing with this business as it has been for over 2 centuries. This bill only passed by 1 vote a few years ago, and now we have a whole machinery out there whose sole purpose it is to go ask activist organizations on both sides to come in and send information in that would be used against members of Congress. I support the gentleman's amendment, and I yield back to the gentleman from North Carolina.
Who seeks recognition? The gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I don't know about Roman law. I'm a little shaky on English law as well, but I will tell you that it doesn't violate any American laws that I'm aware of. If it did, they would be subject to all kinds of legal proceedings against them. I understand fully well that some members didn't like voting for this. They don't like the idea of members of other people other than members of Congress looking at anything we do. I understand that. And there was a great attempt to try to balance that fear with a movement forward, which is what we did. And I'd like to point out very clearly that when the Congress changed from Democrat to Republican, there was no attempt by anybody that I'm aware of to change one aspect of this rule. Not one aspect. That was the appropriate time, and had someone done it, I would have been happy to work with them. I've expressed my concerns here. I've expressed them to the OCE. I've expressed them to other members. I share some of these concerns. But I don't think it's an appropriate thing to simply wield the old-fashioned political tool of a big, heavy, draconian weapon and try to slash their budget and think that you're going to change it. You're not. and you will be perceived, this House will be perceived by the general public for what this is. Simply an attempt to roll back our progress on policing our own activities. Now, I understand that that might make some people comfortable, but it's not the right thing to do, and people here know that. This is payback, and I don't mind. I'm one of the few members of this House who call myself proudly a politician. I understand payback, but let's call it what it is. We don't like what they do, and we're going to defund them. Don't pretend that something else is going on. That's what it is. It will be bad for the House of Representatives, and it will not change the things that people have expressed that they don't like. With that, I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from North Carolina is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I yield 1 minute to the gentleman from California, Mr. Honda.
The gentleman from California is recognized for 1 minute.
I thank the gentleman, and I really understand that the gentleman from North Carolina is highlighting serious concerns with processes that he sees of the Office of Congressional Ethics. And I share some of those concerns, as well as I share some of the concerns the gentleman from Massachusetts shares. And it's really raising the question of trying to improve the ethics process in our House and improving the underlying authorization that may be more appropriate and seeking a more appropriate first steps. And I think that this may be an indicator where we may not be able to support the gentleman's amendment, but at the same time support the issue of improving what it is that he's seeking. And I think that the gentleman from Massachusetts would probably be willing to work on that, and I think my friends on the other side would too. So reluctantly, while I'm not personally in opposition, I think that in this portion of the process, I would be in opposition.
Gentleman's time has expired. Who seeks recognition? Gentleman from Massachusetts yields back. The question is on the amendment offered. The gentleman from North Carolina.
How much time remains?
The gentleman has 1 minute remaining.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield myself the balance of the time.
The gentleman is recognized.
I thank the gentleman. Let me just address this whole issue of retaliation. This is not retaliation. This is a better use of the money than the OCE is making of it. There is an undercurrent in this House. Everybody knows that the OCE processes have been unfair, undemocratic, and they have signaled people out. And it should stop, and we should stand up and say that it should stop. I think we did not give the OCE the authority to initiate themselves investigations without an outside complainant. They have systematically done that, and to the extent they have done it, we have provided more funding than I think is appropriate, which is why I got to 40% as opposed to 100%. I want them to continue to go on with the investigations that are out there, and when other people initiate them, they should be allowed to pursue them. But they should not be allowed to initiate on their own witch hunts against members of Congress. I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from North Carolina. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it.
Mr. Chairman, I ask for a recorded vote.
The gentleman from North Carolina asks for a recorded vote. Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from North Carolina will be postponed. It is now in order to consider Amendment Number 3 printed in the House Report, 112-173. For what purpose does the gentleman from Georgia seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 3, printed in House Report number 112-173, offered by Mr. Brown of Georgia.
Pursuant to House Resolution 359, the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Brown, and a member opposed will each control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My amendment would reduce funding for the Joint Economic Committee by 25% and transfer more than $1 million to the deficit reduction account. The Joint Economic Committee is tasked with many of the duties of other congressional committees. Those other congressional committees already perform these duties, such as holding hearings, performing research, and studying the U.S. economy. We here in America are facing a tremendous financial crisis. The legislative branch should not be excluded during budget cut debates. The Joint Economic Committee performs overlapping duties that could easily be maintained by the Ways and Means Committee or the Budget Committees or even the respective leadership policy committees. A 25% cut is very modest considering the gravity of the enormous debt that we are accumulating each and every day, and we must begin paying down that debt. Our debt level is unsustainable, totally unsustainable. We are broke as a nation. We have to start cutting in every aspect of the government's expenditures. And I believe the Joint Economic Committee can afford it. And I urge my colleagues to support my amendment, and I yield back.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from California is recognized.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. I rise to claim time in opposition of this amendment.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
The amendment would cut the Joint Economic Committee by over $1 million, or 25%. The funding included in the bill for the JEC is already less than the funding level provided to the JEC in FY 2008. And the Joint Economic Committee is a bicameral congressional committee composed of 10 members from each the Senate and the House of Representatives. There are 10 Democrats and 10 Republicans on the committee. The gentleman does not have an amendment to go after the House committee, but instead has chosen to go after funding for this joint committee. I hope this isn't an effort to strike funding because this committee is jointly managed with the Senate. The last thing this Congress needs is less collaboration between these two bodies. We need to continue that. The main purpose of the JEC is to make a continuing study of matters related to the U.S. economy, and this is exactly the type of analysis members from both parties and both bodies need as we tackle complex economic issues as a nation. I oppose this amendment, and I ask my colleagues to do the same.
Gentleman reserves.
I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
I reserve.
Gentleman reserves. The gentleman from California is recognized.
How many minutes? Just one. Mr. Chairman, I yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Brady.
The gentleman from Texas is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise in opposition to this amendment. I respect very much gentlemen from Georgia's efforts on cutting and shrinking the size of the government, but the Joint Economic Committee is already, under the Appropriations recommendation, operating below the 2006 levels, so is doing more than its share of shrinking and running efficiently. Unlike other committees, the Joint Economic Committee is created by law to be the counterpart for Congress to weigh against the President's Council of Economic Advisors. It is bicameral, it is bipartisan, provides information important to the size of government, the efficiency of government, what can get our economy going. An example of the research is the 4 months, weekends, evenings, it was done going through every page and provision of the 2,801 new page health care law to identify all the new bureaucracies, agencies, taxes, bureaucracies that will be in between you and your doctor. That research could not be done, and I would tell you our Democrat friends will say it provides the same type of analysis for their issues. This is the type of information Congress needs as we move forward on the critical issues of the economy. This committee has done its share of cuts. I respectfully oppose this amendment.
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
I reserve.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from California is recognized.
I yield back.
The gentleman from California yields back. The gentleman from Georgia.
I appreciate that this is a bicameral, bipartisan committee, but as I mentioned during my first remarks, these functions could be very well performed by other committees, other functions. These are duplicative services. And so I urge adoption of my amendment, and I yield back.
The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Georgia. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to. It's now in order to consider Amendment Number 4, printed in House Report 112-173. For what purpose does the gentleman from Georgia seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 4, printed in House Report number 112-173, offered by Mr. Brown of Georgia.
Pursuant to House Resolution 359, the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Brown, and a member opposed will each control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My amendment would simply reduce funding for the Office of Compliance to the fiscal year 2008 level and would transfer almost $500,000 into the spending reduction account. At the time that we are facing such pressing fiscal crisis, we have a financial fiasco here in America because of the outrageous spending that Congress has been doing by both parties. Scaling back the spending for the Office of Compliance to the 2008 levels is a modest and a reasonable request. We have to continue to make cuts in every corner of the budget that we can, and we have to prioritize paying down our massive federal debt that is totally unsustainable. Again, if most offices within the federal government can reduce their spending back to 2008 levels, it is only logical for the Office of Compliance to do the very same. And I urge my colleagues to support this amendment. Now reserve.
Gentleman reserves. What purpose does the gentleman from California rise?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise to claim time in opposition to this amendment.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
The amendment would cut the Office of Compliance by $467,000, even though the office is cut in the underlying bill by 6.4%, the same as the overall bill reduction. I have to question the motives of cutting the Office of Compliance disproportionately to the overall bill. Maybe the gentleman is not aware, but this office was established in 1995 by the Republican Congress to satisfy the Republican contract with America. The office implements the Congressional Accountability Act to ensure that Congress complies with safety, discrimination, and accessibility laws that everyone else in the nation must follow. This amendment suggests that Congress should ease up on requirements to provide our workers with a fair and safe working environment. Therefore, I oppose this amendment and urge my colleagues to do the same. Certainly.
I associate myself with the gentleman's remark, and I urge a no vote on this amendment.
Gentleman reserves.
I reserve.
The gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
Reserve.
The gentleman from Georgia reserves. The gentleman from California is recognized.
I'll yield. So I just want to just close with the same comments I did in the last paragraph, that this amendment suggests that Congress should ease up on requirements to providing our workers with a fair and safe working environment, and I don't think we should back off on that. And with that, I yield.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I appreciate my friend Mr. Honda's comments. I offered 8 amendments total. Only 3 were held to be in order, so I'm not looking at anything specifically except for the whole bill to try to cut spending, because it's absolutely critical as we go forward that we put this country back on a good fiscal standing. I believe very firmly that we need to look at every single nook and corner, every dollar spent by the federal government, and cut wherever we can. I think this is a reasonable request, and I yield back.
And
urge adoption of my amendment.
Gentleman yields back. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Georgia. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to. It is now in order to consider Amendment Number 5, printed in House Report 112-173. For what purpose does the gentlelady from New York seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I rise to propose an amendment, and I request 3 minutes.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 5, printed in House Report number 112-173, offered by Ms. Hayworth of New York.
Pursuant to House Resolution 359, the gentlewoman from New York, Ms. Hayworth, and a member opposed will each control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from New York.
Mr. Chairman, I yield myself 3 minutes. My amendment proposes that we cut the $632,780, the proposed increase in funding to the Botanic Garden, and transfer that amount to the spending reduction account. While the Botanic Garden in the FY12 budget receives an increase, almost every other account in the legislative branch appropriations bill has been decreased, including for the Congressional Research Service, Congressional Budget Office, JEC, JCT, and the Capitol Police Buildings, Grounds, and Security account. The Botanic Garden provides education and outreach programs, and they are definitely of value, and they have been commended in the committee report for their accomplishments. But it is a time of austerity, and the Botanic Garden should take the necessary steps to continue to pursue those programs with the same funding as they've received in fiscal year 11. Throughout the rest of the legislative branch and the federal government, we're cutting costs. We're eliminating employee spots, and we're taking other reductive measures. Each of our offices and committees will be operating with additional cuts. The Botanic Garden can itself continue to provide successful services and maintain its venue with the same level of funding as in FY 2011. I thank you, sir, and I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Gosar.
The gentleman from Arizona is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam. Mr. Chairman, I rise in support of this amendment submitted with Ms. Hayworth to reduce the spending at the Botanical Gardens. We're in the middle of a spending crisis that may lead to a sovereign debt crisis. In my view, there are very few programs funded by the federal government that can be exempt from fiscal responsibility and scrutiny. This is an unprecedented fiscal crisis. I applaud the Appropriations Committee's leadership and commitment to making significant spending reductions in this bill, including reducing personal office expenses and reducing committee budgets. There are many wonderful museums and points of interest here in Washington, D.C., and the Botanical Garden is among the best. My amendment, which would reduce its funding appropriations and take away its proposed increase, is not based on any act or omission by the Botanical Gardens. They want a great program here. But let me be clear. As an avid outdoorsman and a gardener myself, I personally derive much benefit from these botanical gardens right here on the Capitol Hill. I have visited these beautiful places many times and always learn and see something new. Our amendment is not intended to make the statement that the Botanical Garden is not a good and worthy program. It is. But it is not good and it is not constitutionally mandated. It is not essential to providing key services to Americans. It does not generate jobs. It does contribute to the knowledge and understanding of the world, and that has great value. Our country is in the midst of an epic fiscal crisis that threatens the livelihood and well-being of every single American, and even good and worthy programs such as the United States Botanical Gardens cannot be spared from every effort to scale down our federal budget significantly. This proposed amendment is a fair cut, indeed in light of our fiscal crisis, a modest cut, and consistent with the committee's recommendations for other programs within this bill. I am confident that even with this reduced budget, the Botanical Gardens will be able to offer an educational experience to all of us and to our constituents when they come to visit Capitol Hill. It is for those constituents that we offer this amendment and ask you for your support. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentlelady from New York reserves.
That's my time.
Gentlelady reserves. For what purpose does the gentleman from California rise?
I rise to claim time in opposition of the amendment.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Well, I'm not necessarily opposed to the amendment. I think that the record should be clear on the funding level in the bill. To suggest that the $600,000 increase in the Botanic Garden is somehow not needed is simply not true. The funding will be used for painting, electrical upgrades, elevator maintenance, evaporative cooling system upgrades, and the replacement for our vent system used in the plant greenhouse. I applaud the chairman for funding this necessary maintenance work so we do not have more expensive deferred maintenance in the future. This bill does not fund millions in deferred maintenance needed by the architect to sustain and improve our aging national iconic buildings, including the Capitol. However, the chairman found a small amount of funding to try and keep up with the maintenance at the Botanic Garden, and the members attack because they can get a good headline in the paper. And I yield back.
Gentleman yields back.
Mr. Chairman, I just reserve.
Gentleman reserves. Gentlelady from New York is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I certainly respect the points that the gentleman from California has made, but in a time when we are running a deficit of $1.4 trillion at least, we have to seek to pursue sensible measures to reduce budgets wherever we can. And we are unfortunately faced with a time in our history in which what is nice to have or good to have must yield to what we absolutely must have. And therefore, I will defend the proposed reduction in the account that we have made in this amendment. And I